At Paris, just after dark, one gusty evening in the autumn of 1841, I was enjoying the twofold luxury of meditation in the maelstrom, in company with my friend C. Auguste Dupin in his little back library or book closet, number 33, Rue du Nord, Faubourg Saint-Germain. For 1 hour at least we had maintained a profound silence, while each, to any casual observer, might have seemed intently, exclusively occupied with the curling eddies of smoke that oppressed the atmosphere of the chamber. For myself, however, I was mentally discussing certain topics which had formed matter for conversation between us at an earlier period in the evening. I mean the affair of the Rue Morgue, and the mystery attending the murder of Marie Roget. I looked upon it, therefore, as something of a coincidence, when the door of our apartment was thrown open, and admitted our old acquaintance, Monsieur G., prefect of Parisian police. Gave him a hearty welcome, for there was nearly half as much of entertaining as the contemptible about the man, and we had not seen him for several years. We had been sitting in the dark, and Dupin now rose from the purpose of lighting a lamp, but sat down again, without doing so, upon G's saying that he called to consult us, or rather to ask the opinion of my friend about some official business which had been occasioned a great deal of trouble. "If there is any point regarding reflection," observed Dupin, as he forebode to enkindle the wick, "we shall examine it to better purpose in the dark." "That is another of your odd notions," said the Prefect, who had a fashion of calling everything odd that was beyond his comprehension, and thus lived amid an absolute legion of oddities. "Very true," said Dupin, as he supplied his visitor with a pipe, and I rolled towards him a comfortable chair. "And what is the difficulty now?" I asked. "Nothing in the assassination way, I hope?" "Oh, no, nothing of that nature. The fact is, the business is very simple indeed, and make no doubt that we can manage it sufficiently well ourselves, but that I thought Dupin would like to hear the details of it, because it is so excessively odd." "Simple and odd," said Dupin. "Why, yes, and not exactly that either. The fact is, we have all been a good deal puzzled because the affair is so simple, and it baffles us altogether." "Perhaps it is the simplicity of the very thing that puts you at fault," said my friend. "What nonsense do you talk?" replied the Prefect, laughing heartily. "Perhaps the mystery is a little too plain," said Dupin. "Oh, good heavens! Who ever heard of such an idea? A little too self-evident." roared our visitor, profoundly amused. "Oh, Dupin, you will be the death of me yet." "And what, after all, is the matter on hand?" I asked. "Why, I will tell you," replied the Prefect, as he gave a long, steady, contemplative puff, and settled himself in his chair. "I'll tell you in a few words. But before I begin, let me caution you that this is an affair demanding the greatest secrecy, and that I should most probably lose the position I now hold, were it known that I had confided in anyone." "Proceed," said I. "Or not," said Dupin. "Well, then, I have received personal information from a very high quarter of certain documents of the last importance which has been purloined from the royal apartments. The individual who purloined it is known, this is beyond doubt. He was keen to take it. It is known also that it still remains in his possession." "How is this known?" asked Dupin. "It is clearly inferred," replied the Prefect, "from the nature of the document, and from the non-appearance of certain results which would at once arise from its passing out of the robber's possession, that is to say, from his employing it as he must design in the end to employ it." "Be a little more explicit," I said. Well, I may venture so far as to say that the paper gives its holder a certain power in a certain quarter, but this power is immensely valuable. The prefect was fond of the kind of diplomacy. Still, I do not understand, said Dupin. No? Well, the disclosure of the document to a third person who shall be nameless would bring in question the honor of a personage of most exalted station, and this fact gives the holder of the document an ascendancy over the illustrious personage whose honor and peace are jeopardized. But this ascendancy, I interposed, would depend upon the robber's knowledge of the ruser's knowledge of the robber. Who would dare? The thief, said she, is the Minister D, who dares all things, who those unbecoming as well as becoming of a man. The method of the theft was not less ingenious than bold. The document in question, a letter to be frank, had been received by the person robbed while alone in the royal boudoir. During its perusal, she was suddenly interrupted by the entrance of the other exalted personage from whom expressly it was her wish to conceal it. After 100 in vain endeavour to thrust it in a drawer, she was forced to place it, hoped as it was, upon the table. The address, however, was uppermost, and the contents thus exposed, and the letter escaped notice. In this juncture enters the Minister D. His lynx eye immediately perceives the paper, recognizes the handwriting of the address, observes the confusion of the personage addressed, and fathoms the secret. After some business transaction hurried through his ordinary manner, he produces a letter somewhat similar to the one in question, opens it, pretends to read it, and then places it in close juxtaposition to the other. And he converses for some 15 minutes of public affairs. At length, in taking leave, he also takes from the table the letters to which he had no claim. His rightful owner saw, but of course dared not to call attention to the act in the presence of the third personage who stood at her elbow. The minister decamped, leaving his own letter, none of known points, on the turntable. Here, then, said Dupin to me, you have precisely what you demand to make the ascendancy complete. The robber's knowledge of the loser's knowledge of the robber. Yes, replied the prefect, and the power thus attained has for some months now been wielded for political purposes to a dangerous extent. The personage robbed is more thoroughly convinced every day of the necessity of reclaiming her letter. But this, of course, cannot be done openly. In fine, driven to despair, she has committed the matter to me. Then whom, said Dupin, perfect, amid a perfect whirlwind of smoke, no more sagacious agent could, I suppose, be desired or imagined. You flatter me, replied the prefect, but it is possible that some opinion may have been entertained. It is clear, said I, as you observe, that the letter is still in possession of the minister, since it is in his possession, and not any employment letter which bestows the power. With the employment the power departs. True, said she, and upon this conviction I proceeded. My first care was to make thorough search of the minister's hotel, and here my chief embarrassment lay in the necessity of searching without his knowledge. Beyond all things, I have been warned of the danger which would result from giving him reason to suspect our design. But, said I, you are quite au fait in these investigations. The prison police have done this thing often before. Oh, yes, and for this reason I do not despair. The habits of the minister gave me, too, a great advantage. He is frequently absent from home all night. The servants are by no means numerous. They sleep at a distance from their master's apartment, and chiefly Neapolitans are readily made drunk. I have keys, as you know, with which I can open any chamber or cabinet in Paris. For 3 months the night has not passed, during the greater part of which I have been engaged personally in ransacking the D Hotel. My honor is interested, and, to mention a great secret, the reward is enormous. So I did not abandon the search until I had become fully satisfied that the thief is a more astute man than myself. I fancy that I have investigated every nook and corner of the premises in which it is possible that the paper can be concealed. But that is it not possible, I suggested, that although the letter may be in possession of the minister, as it unquestionably is, he may have concealed it elsewhere upon his own premises? That is barely possible, said Dupin. Present peculiar condition of affairs at court, and especially those intrigues in which D is known to be involved, would render the instant availability of the document, its susceptibility of being produced the most, a point of nearly equal importance with its possession. Its susceptibility is being produced, said I. That is to say, of being destroyed, said Dupin. True, I observed. The paper is clearly then written upon the premises. As for its being the person of the minister, we may consider that out of the question. Entirely, said the prefect. He has been twice waylaid as if by footpads, and his person rigidly searched and under my own inspection. You might have spared yourself this trouble, said Dupin. D, I presume, is not altogether a fool, and if not, must have participated in these wailings as a matter of course. Not altogether a fool, said Z, but then he's a poet, which I take only to be one removed from a fool. True, said Dupin, with a long and thoughtful whiff from his meerschaum. Although I have been guilty of certain dogma myself. Suppose you detail, said I, the particulars of your search. Why, the fact is, we took our time and we searched everywhere. I have had long experiences in these affairs. I took the entire building room by room, devoting the nights of a whole week to each. We examined first the furniture of each apartment. We opened every possible drawer, and I presume you know that to a properly trained police agent, such thing as a secret drawer is impossible. Has any man who is a dolt who perhaps permits a secret drawer to escape from in search of this kind? This thing is so plain. There is a certain amount of bulk, of space, to be accounted for in every cabinet. Then we have accurate rules. The 50th part of a line could not escape from us. After the cabinets we took the chairs. The cushions were probed with the fine long needles you have seen me employ. From the tables we removed the tops. Why so? Sometimes the top of the table or other similarly arranged piece of furniture is removed by the person wishing to conceal an article. Then the leg is activated, the article deposited within the cavity, and the top replaced. The bottoms and tops of bedposts are employed in the same way. But could not the cavity be detected by surroundings? I asked. By no means, if when the article is deposited, a sufficient wadding of cotton be placed around it. Besides, in our case, we are obliged to proceed without noise. But you could have not have removed. You could have taken pieces all articles of furniture in which would have been possible to make a deposit in the manner you mentioned. A letter may be compressed into a thin spiral roll, not differing much in the shape or bulk from a large knitting needle, and thus in this form it might be inserted into the rung of a chair, for example. Not take all pieces all the chairs? Certainly not. We did better. We examined the rungs of every chair in the hotel, and indeed the jointings of every description of furniture by the aid of a most powerful microscope. Had there been any traces of recent disturbance, we should not have failed to detect it instantly. A single grain of Gimlet dust, for example, would have been obvious as an apple. Any disorder in the gluing, any unusual gaping in the joints would have sufficed to ensure detection. I presume you looked into the mirrors beyond between the boards and plates. You probed the beds and bedclothes as well as the curtains and carpets. That's of course. And when we had absolutely completed every particle of furniture in this way, then we examined the house itself. We divided its entire surface into compartments which we numbered so that none might be missed, and we scrutinized every individual inch throughout the premises, including two houses immediately adjoining, with a microscope as before. The two houses adjoining! I exclaimed. You must have had a great deal of trouble. We had, but the reward offered is prodigious. You include the grounds about the houses? All the grounds were paved with brick. They gave us comparatively little trouble. We examined the moss between the bricks and found it undisturbed. You looked among these papers, of course, and into the books of the library? Certainly. We opened every package and parcel. We opened not only every book, but we turned over every leaf in each volume, not contenting ourselves with mere sake, according to the fashion of some police officers. We also measured the thickness of every book cover with most accurate advanced measurement, and applied to each the most jealous scrutiny of the microscope. Had any of the buildings been recently meddled with, it would have been utterly impossible that the fact should have escaped observation. Some 5 or 6 volumes, just from the hands of the binder, we carefully probed longitudinally with needles. You explored the floors beneath the carpets? Beyond doubt. We removed every carpet and examined the boards with a microscope. The paper on the walls? Yes. You looked into the cellars? We did. Then, I said, you've been making a miscalculation. There is not upon the premises you suppose. I fear you are right there, said the prefect. And now, Dupin, what would you advise me to do? To make a thorough research of the premises. That is absolutely needless, he replied. I am not more sure that I breathe than I am that the leisure is not the hotel. I have no better advice to give you, said Dupin. We have, of course, an accurate description of the letter. Oh, yes. And here the prefect, producing a memorandum book, proceeded to read aloud a minute account of the internal and especially of the external appearance of the missing document. Soon after finishing the perusal of this description, he took his departure, more entirely depressed in spirits than I had ever known the good gentleman before. About a month afterwards he paid us another visit, and found us occupied nearly as before. He took a pipe and chair and entered into the ordinary conversation. At length I said, "Well, but gee, what of the Purloined letter? I presume you have at least made up your mind there's no such thing as overreaching the minister?" "Confound him, say I. Yes, I made the re-examination. However, as Dupin suggested, but it was all labour lost, as I knew it would be." "How much would be the reward offered, did you say?" asked Dupin. "Why, a very great deal. A very liberal reward. I don't like to say how much precisely, but one thing I will say that I wouldn't mind giving my individual cheque for 50,000 francs to any one who could obtain me that pleasure. The fact is, it is becoming more and more important every day, and the reward has been lately doubled. If it were trebled, however, I could do no more than I have." "Why, yes," said Dupin drawingly, between the whiffs of Miscom. "I think, really, see, you have not exerted yourself to the utmost in this matter. You might do a little more, I think, eh? How? In what way?" "Why, you might employ counsel in the matter, eh? Do you remember the story of Abernethy?" "No, hang Abernethy!" "To be sure, hang him and welcome. But once upon a time, a certain rich miser conceived a design of sponging upon this abernethy for medical opinion. Getting up for this purpose and an ordinary conversation in the private company, he insinuated the case to a physician, the imaginary individual. We will suppose, said the miser, that the symptoms are such and such. Thou, doctor, what would you have directed him to take? Take, said Abernethy. Why, take advice, to be sure. But, said the prefect, a little discomposed, I am perfectly willing to take advice and to pay for it. I would really give 50,000 francs to anyone who would aid me in the matter. In that case, replied Dupin, opening a drawer and producing a checkbook, you may well fill me up a check for the amount mentioned. When you have signed it, I'll hand you the letter. I was astounded. The prefect appeared absolutely thunderstricken. For some minutes he remained speechless and motionless, looking incredulously at my friend with open mouth, and his eyes seemed to be starting from their sockets. Then, apparently recovering himself in some measure, he seized a pen, and after several pauses and vacant stares, finally filled up and signed a check for 50,000 francs and handed it across the table to Dupin. I examined it carefully and deposited his pocketbook, then unlocking an escritoire, took thence a letter and gave it to the prefect. The functionary grasped it in a perfect agony of joy, opened it with trembling hand, cast a rapid glance at its contents, and then, scrambling and struggling at the door, rushed at length unceremoniously from the room and from the house without having uttered a syllable since Dupin had requested him to fill up the check. When he had gone, my friend entered into some explanation. The Parisian police, he said, are exceedingly able in their way. They're persevering, ingenious, cunning, and thoroughly versed in the knowledge which their duties seem chiefly to demand. Thus, when G detailed to us his mode of searching the premises of Hotel D, I felt entire confidence in his having made satisfactory investigation, so far as his labors extended. So far as his labors extended? Said I. Yes, said Dupin. The measures adopted were not only the best of their kind, but are carried out to absolute perfection. He had the lead been deposited within the range of their search, these fellows would, beyond a question, have found it. The measures, then, he continued, were good in their kind, and well executed. Their defect lay in their being applicable to the case, to the man. A certain set of highly ingenious resources with the prefect, a sort of Procrustean bed, for which he forcibly adapts his designs. But he perpetually errs by being too deep or too shallow, for the matter in hand, and many schoolboys better reasoner than he. I knew one about 8 years of age whose success in guessing at the same game, even in odd, attracted universal admiration. The game is simple and played with marbles. One player holds in his hand a number of these toys and learns another whether that number is even or odd. If the guess is right, the guesser wins one. If wrong, he loses one. The boy to whom I allude won all the marbles of the school. Of course, he had some principle of guessing, and this lay in mere observation and admeasurement of the astuteness of his opponent. For example, an arrant simpleton in his opponent, and holding up his closed hand, asks, "Are they even or odd?" Our schoolboy was odd and loses, but upon the second trial he wins, for he then says to himself, "The simpleton had them even upon the first trial, and his amount of cunning is just as sufficient to make him have them odd upon the second. I therefore guess odd." He guesses odd and wins. Now, with a simpleton a degree above the first, he would have reasoned thus: this fellow finds that in the first instance I get tired, in the second he will propose to himself upon the first impulse a simple variation from even to odd, as he did the simpleton, but then a second thought will suggest that this too is a simple variation, and finally he will decide upon putting it even as before. I therefore guess even. He guesses even and wins. Now this mode of reasoning in the schoolboy, whom his fellows termed lucky, what, in its last analysis, is it? It is merely, I said, an identification of the reasoner's intellect with that of his opponent. It is, said Dupin. And upon inquiring the boy by what means he effected a thorough identification in which his success consisted, I received answer as follows. When I wish to find out how wise, or how stupid, or how good, or how wicked is any one, or what his thoughts are at the moment, I fasten the expression on my face, as accurately as possible, in accordance with the expression of his, and then wait to see what thoughts or sentiments arise by mind or heart, as if to match the correspondent with the expression. This response of the schoolboy lies at the bottom of all spurious profundity which has been attributed to Rochefort, to Legros, to Machiavelli, and to Campanella. And the identification, I said, of the reasoner's intellect with that the opponent depends, if you understand all right, upon the accuracy which the opponent's intellect is measured. For its practical value depends upon this, replied Dupin. The prefect and his cohort fail so frequently, first, by default of this identification, and secondly, by ill measurement, or rather through non-measurement of the intellect with which they were engaged. They consider only their own ideas of ingenuity, and in searching for anything hidden, advert only to the modes which they would have hidden it. They are right in this much, that their own ingenuity is a faithful representative of the mass, but when the cunning of the individual felon is diverse in character from their own, the felon foils them, of course. This happens when it is above their own, and very usually when it is below. They have no variation of principle in their investigations. At best, when urged by some unusual emergency, by some extraordinary reward, they tend to exaggerate their old modes of practice without touching the principles. What, for example, in the case of D, has been done to vary the principle of action? What is all this boring and probing and sounding and scrutinizing with the microscope and dividing the surface of the building into registered square inches? What is all it all but an exaggeration of the application of the one principle or set principles search, which are based upon the one set of notions regarding human ingenuity, to which the prefect, in the long routine of his duty, has been accustomed. Do you not see? He has taken for granted that all men proceed to conceal a letter, not exactly a gimlet hole bored in a chair leg, but at least in some out of the way hole or corner suggested by the same tenor of thought which would urge a man to secrete a letter in a gimlet hole bored in a chair leg. And do you not see also that such recesses, nooks for concealment are adapted only for ordinary occasions, and would be adopted only by ordinary intellects? For in all cases of concealment, a disposal of this article concealed, a disposal of it in this wretched manner, is in the very first instance presumable and presumed, and thus discovery depends not upon the actual acumen, but altogether upon the mere care, patience, and determination of the seekers, and where the case is important, or what amounts to the same things in policial laws, when the reward is of magnitude, the qualities in question have never been known to fail. You will now understand what I meant in suggesting that, had the Purloined letter been anywhere within the limits of the prefix examination. In other words, had the principle of concealment been comprehended within the principle of the prefix, its discovery would have been a matter altogether beyond question. This functionary, however, has been thoroughly mystified, and the remote source of his defeat lies in the supposition that the minister is a fool because he acquired renown as a poet. All fools are poets. This the prefect feels, and he is merely guilty of a non-distributoria medi in thence inferring all poets are fools. But is this really the poet? I asked. There are two brothers I know, and both have obtained reputation letters. The minister, I believe, has written learnedly on the differential calculus. He is a mathematician and no poet. You are mistaken. I know him well. He is both. As a poet and mathematician, one would reason well. As a mere mathematician, he could not have reasoned at all, and thus would have been at the mercy of the prefect. You surprise me, I said, by these opinions which are contradicted by the voice of the world. You do not mean to say not the well-digested idea for centuries. The mathematical reason has long been regarded as the reason par excellence. Il y a prépare, said Dupin, quoting from Stamford, quid tot idée publique ta convention reçue est non sortis car adrun au plus grand nombre. Mathematicians, I grant to, have done their best to promulgate the popular error to which you allude, and which is none the less an error for a propagation as truth. With an art worthy of better cause, for example, they have inserted the term analysis into applications of algebra. The French are the originators of this particular deception, but if a term of any importance, if words derive any value from applicability, analysis conveys algebra about as much as in Latin ambitious implies ambition, religio, religion, or homines, honesty, the set of honorable men. You have a quarrel on hand at sea, said I, with some of the algebraists of Paris, but proceed. I dispute the availability and thus the value of that reason which is cultivated in a special form other than abstractly logical. I dispute in particular the reason educed by mathematical study. The mathematics are science of form and quantity. Mathematical reasoning is merely logic applied to observation upon form and quantity. The great error lies in supposing that even the truths of what I call pure algebra are abstract or general truths. And this error is so egregious that I am confounded at the universality in which it has been received. Mathematical axioms are not axioms of general truth. What is true of relation of form and quantity is often grossly false in regards to morals, for example. In this latter science, it is usually very untrue that the aggregate parts are equal to the whole. In chemistry, also the axiom fails. In the consideration of motive, it fails, for two motives, each of a given value, have not necessarily a value when united equal to the sum of their values apart. There are numerous other mathematical truths which are only truths within the limits of relation, but the mathematician argues from his finite truths through habit as if they were of absolutely general applicability as the world imagines them to be. Bryant, in his very learned mythology, mentions an analogous source of error where he says that although the pagan fables were not believed, yet we forget ourselves continually and make inferences from them as existing realities. With the algebraists, however, they who are pagans themselves, the pagan fables are believed, and the inferences are made not so much through lapse of memory as through an unaccountable addling of the brains. In short, I have never yet encountered the mere mathematician who could be trusted out of equal roots, or one who did not clearly steadily hold it. There was a point that x squared plus px was absolutely and unconditionally equal to q. Say to one of those gentlemen, by way of experiment, if you please, that you believe any occasions may occur where x squared plus px is not altogether equal to q, and having made him understand what you mean, get out of his reach as speedily as convenient, for beyond doubt he will endeavor to knock you down. I mean to say, continued Dupin, while I merely laughed at the observations, that if the minister had been no more than a mathematician, the prefect would have been under no necessary necessity to give me this check. I knew him, however, as both mathematician and poet, and my measures were adapted to this capacity with reference to the circumstances by which he was surrounded. I knew him as a courtier, too, and as a bold incongruent. Such a man, I considered, could not fail to be aware of the ordinary policial modes of action. He would have failed to anticipate, and events now proved that he did not fail to participate, the waylayings to which he subjected. He must have foreseen, I reflected, the special investigations of his premises, his frequent absences from home at night, which were hailed by the prefect as certain aids to his success. I regarded only as ruses to afford opportunity for thorough search to the police, and thus the sooner to impress them with the conviction which G, in fact, did finally arrive, the conviction that the letter was not upon the premises. I felt also that the whole train of thought which I was at some pains in detailing to you just now concerning the invariable principle of policial action in such articles concealed, I felt this whole train of thought would necessarily pass through the mind of the minister. It would imperatively lead him to despise all the ordinary nooks of concealment. He could not, I reflected, be so weak as to not see the most intricate and remote recess of his hotel be open as the commonest closets of the Oz, to the probes, to the gimlets, and to the microscopes of the prefect. I saw, in fine, that he would be driven, as a matter of course, to simplicity, if not deliberately induced to it as a matter of choice. You'll remember perhaps how desperately the prefect laughed when I suggested upon our first interview that it was just possible that this mystery could have troubled him so much to make an account of its being so very self-evident. Yes, said I remember his merriment well. I really thought he would have fallen into convulsions. The material world, continued Dupin, abounds with very strict analogies to the immaterial, and thus some color of truth has given way to rhetorical dogma. That metaphor or simile may be made to strengthen an argument as well as to embellish a description. The principle of the vis inertia, for example, seems to be identical in physics and metaphysics. It is not more true in the former that a large body is more difficult to set in motion than a smaller one, and that subsequent momentum is commensurate with this difficulty than it is in the latter. The intellect of a vaster capacity, while more forceful, more constant, more eventful in their movements than those of inferior grade, are yet less readily moved and more embarrassed and full of hesitation in the first steps of progress. Again, have you ever noticed which of these street signs over the shop doors are most attractive to attention? I have never given the matter a thought, I said. There is a game of puzzles, he resumed, which is played upon a map. One party playing requires another to find a given word. Name of the town, river, state, or empire, any word, in short, upon the motley and perplexed surface of the chart. A novice in the game generally seeks to embarrass his opponents by giving them the most minutely lettered names, but the adept selects such words as stretch in large characters from one end of the chart to the other. These, like the overly largely lettered signs and placards on the street, escape observation by dint of being excessively obvious, and here the physical oversight is precisely analogous with the moral apprehension by which the intellect suffers to pass unnoticed those considerations which are too obtrusively and too palpably self-evident. But this is a point, it appears, somewhat above or beneath the understanding of the prefect. He never once thought it probable or possible that the minister had deposited the letter immediately beneath the nose of the whole world by way of best preventing any portion of the world from receiving it. But the more I reflected upon the dashing, daring, and discriminating ingenuity of D, upon the fact that the document must have been at hand if he intended to use it for good purpose, and upon the decisive evidence obtained by the prefect that was not hidden within the limits of the detective's ordinary search, the more satisfied I became that to conceal this letter, the minister resorted to the comprehensive and sagacious expedient of not attempting to conceal it at all. Full of these ideas, I prepared myself with a pair of green spectacles and called one fine morning, quite by accident, at the ministerial hotel. I found D at home, yawning, lounging, and dawdling as usual, and pretending to be in the vast extremity of ennui. He is perhaps the most really energetic human being now alive, but that is only when nobody sees him. To be even with him, I complained of my weak eyes and lamented of the necessity of spectacles, under cover of which I cautiously and thoroughly surveyed the apartment while seemingly intent only on the conversation of my host. I paid especial attention to a large writing table near where he sat, and upon which lay confusedly some miscellaneous letters and other papers, one or two musical instruments, and a few books. Here, however, after a long and deliberate scrutiny, I saw nothing to excite particular suspicion. At length, my eyes, in going to the circuit of the room, fell upon the trumpety filigree card deck of pasteboard that hung dangling by a dirty blue ribbon from a little brass knob just beneath the middle of the mantelpiece. In this rack, which had 3 or 4 compartments, with 5 or 6 visiting cards and solitary letters. The last was so much soiled and crumpled. It was torn nearly in two across the middle, as if by design in the first instance to tear it up entirely as worthless, had been altered or stayed in the second. It had a very large black seal bearing the D, ciphered very conspicuously, and was addressed in diminutive female hand to D, the minister himself. It was thrust carelessly, and even, it seemed, contemptuously, into one of the upper divisions of the rack. No sooner had I glanced at this letter than I could conclude that it had to be that of which I was in search. To be sure, it was, to all appearance, radically different from the one the prefect had read us so minute a description. Here the seal was large and black, with D cipher. There it was small and red, with the ducal arms of the S family. Here the address to the minister was diminutive and feminine. There the superscription to a certain royal personage was marked markedly bold and decided, the size alone formed a point of correspondence. But then the radicalness of these differences, which was excessive, the dirt, the soiled and torn condition of the paper, so inconsistent with the true methodical habits of D, and so suggestive was designed to delude the beholder into an idea of worthlessness of the doctorate, these things, together with the hyper-obtrusive situation of this document, fall in the view of every visitor, and thus exactly in accordance with the conclusions to which I had previously arrived. These things, I say, were strong corroboratives of suspicion in one who had came with the intention of suspect. I protracted my visit as long as possible, and while I maintained a most animated discussion with the minister on a topic which I knew well I had never failed to interest and excite him, I kept my attention really riveted upon the letter. In this examination I committed to memory its external appearance and arrangement in the rack, and also fell, at length, upon the discovery which set at rest whatever trivial doubt I might have entertained. In scrutinizing the edges of the paper, I observed them to be more shaped than seemed necessary. They present the broken appearance which is manifested when the stiff paper, having been once folded and pressed with a folder, is refolded in a reverse direction, and the same creases or edges which had formed the original fold. This discovery was sufficient. It was clear to me that the letter had been turned as a glove inside out, redirected, and resealed. I bade the minister good morning, and took departure at once, leaving a gold snuff box upon the table. Next morning I called to the snuff box, when we resumed quite eagerly the, the conversation of the preceding day. While thus engaged, however, a loud report, as if on a pistol, was heard immediately beneath the windows of the hotel, and was succeeded by a series of fearful screams and the sounds of a mob. D rushed to the casement, threw it open, and looked out. In the meantime, I stepped to the card rack, took the letter, put it in my pocket, and replaced it by facsimile, so far regards externals, which I had carefully prepared at my lodgings, imitating the D cipher very readily by means of a sealed form of bread. This disturbance in the street had been occasioned by the frantic behavior of a man with a musket. He fired it among a crowd of women and children. It proved, however, to be filled without a ball, and the fellow was suffered to go on his way a lunatic or a drunkard. When he had gone, D came from the window, whither I had followed him immediately upon securing the object in view. Soon afterwards I bade him farewell. The pretended lunatic was a man in my own pay. But what purpose had you, I asked, in replacing the letter by a facsimile? Would it not have been better at the very first visit to have seized it openly and departed? D, replied Dupin, is a desperate man and a man of nerve. His hotel, too, is not without attendants devoted to his interests. Had I made the wild attempt you suggest, I would never have felt the ministerial presence alive. The good people of Paris might have heard of me no more. But I am an object apart from these considerations. You know my political positions. In this matter, I acted as a partisan of the lady concerned. For 18 months the minister had her in his power. She now has him in hers. Since, being unaware that the letter is not in his possession, he will proceed with his extractions as if it was. Thus we will inevitably commit himself at once to his political destruction. His downfall, too, will not be more precipitate than awkward. It is all very well to talk about in the facilities desserts of Vanne, but in all kinds of climbing, as Catalini said of singing, it is far more easy to get up than down. If in the present instance I have no sympathy, at least pity, for him who descends. He is that monstrum horrendum, an unprincipled man of genius. I confess, however, that I should likely very well know how the precise character of his thoughts when, being defied by her whom prefect terms a certain personage, he is reduced to the opening there which I have from on the card rack. How? Did you put anything particular in it? Why, it did not seem altogether right to leave him the interior blank. That would have been insulting. Dear at Vienna once did be an evil term, which I told him quite good humouredly that I should remember. So, as I knew he would feel some curiosity in regards to the identity of a person who had outwitted him, I thought it pity not to give him a clue. He is well acquainted with my MS and just copied the middle of of the see the words on distance symphonous see the and they are to be found in Cerblan's artistry.